Welcome back to Mirror's Signal podcast. I'm your host, Josh Holleran, and today we are joined by Haydn Jenkins. Haydn has spent a large portion of his career teaching students with additional needs, whether that's learning difficulties or physical disabilities. In today's episode, he shares a lot of his experience in this field, and we cover a lot of different topics from hidden disabilities to physical disabilities, some of the signs that we might see while we're in the car with our students, some of the equipment that's available if we're teaching people with physical disabilities. Towards the end of the episode, he shares his experience on carrying out driver assessments and what that might look like. And generally, lots of great information, especially if you're thinking of moving into this part of the industry. There is a need for more ADIs delivering specialist training. So I hope you enjoy this episode. If you are enjoying, please make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel and make sure that you give this episode a like. If you've got any questions or any thoughts on the episode, make sure that you leave a comment. You can also head to our Facebook page or our Facebook group, and they're both available on Mirror's Signal podcast. If you're currently watching the video version of this episode on the YouTube app, you can also get the audio version, and that's available on the YouTube Music app. So make sure that you give the episode a like, hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment, and we will get on with the episode. So, Haydn, how are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you.
So today I'd like to, if we can, discuss a little bit on hidden disabilities. I know we've been messaging and talking, and in our job, I'm finding that there are some students where maybe some things just aren't quite adding up. And when I spoke to
Yeah.
you about doing this episode, kind of hidden disabilities come up, and it'd be good if we could chat about that. So, what are hidden disabilities? What things might we come up against?
Um, a lot of people with dyslexia, dyscalculia, autism, ADHD mask because they want to be seen as normal. Now, some people will be open and talk to you about it, but a lot will not volunteer that information. Now, because I got a reputation as a specialist, people usually volunteer that information to me on the phone call. But certainly when I was a green behind the ears ADI back in 1991. No, people wouldn't tell you they were dyslexic. They wouldn't tell you. I mean, it might be that they've got no specific diagnosis, but they have a slowness in processing information. It could be they got global delay, which is just they're not sure what the condition is, so they call it not otherwise specified.
Okay.
Um, it's one I really do dislike, not otherwise specified. Um, because it sort of says you've got some kind of learning difficulty there, but we don't know what it is. And you do get a lot of people because you know, shouldn't say this, but my wife is dyslexic, same as me. Uh, when I left school, I was illiterate, functionally illiterate. I could do my name, address. Much more than that, I couldn't do. So over the years, people showed me things like in my checkbook, I had the numbers 1 to 100 written in the back of the checkbook so I could copy the words over when I had a check to write. Just little things like that. Um, it wasn't until I started to train to become a driving instructor, I looked at my education a lot more, and I went back to college. Um, Back around the 90s, you could go to the second chance education. They don't seem to have that anymore, but you could go and do a qualification that you may not have had at school. And the teachers at these second chance places were much better than a general teacher doing 30 children and not getting anywhere. Because you were working one-to-one with these teachers, so it was a lot easier for them and a lot easier for me. Um, I remember one teacher talking about apostrophes. I'd struggled with apostrophes for my life, whether to put the apostrophe before or after or not use it at all. And the way she explained it was, well, do those headlights, do they come in pairs? Yeah. Well, you don't need an apostrophe for them because it's headlights. If someone owns something, it's apostrophe, and she explained it to me very simply. And I got it, but I still make mistakes. Don't get me wrong. I'm not perfect when it comes to apostrophes or punctuation, but certainly she explained it in a much easier way than school had. Um, so for me, I mean, the lady's name, I still remember it. The lady's name was Jill Wilson. Um, I went there just for a little bit of help with my reading and writing, and I ended up taking the equivalent of a GCSE in English. It wasn't called a GCSE; it was City and Guilds Level 3 something. Um, but certainly, yeah, it was a completely different educational system than what we'd had at school, with maybe 35 children in the room, all not having any attention at all. But
So
yeah,
how can that play out in driving lessons? But you mentioned at the beginning about ADHD, autism,
yeah,
dyspraxia, dyscalculia. Now, you said they may be masked, and I
some will mask,
expect
yeah,
some people are undiagnosed or unaware of it, maybe because they're in a class of 30 people
yeah.
up until they're one-on-one with us. What are some of the things that we might see in our lessons that could then give us an indication that maybe we need to offer additional support or approach it slightly differently?
Um, one of the things is the person losing interest in what you're saying. Very easy for people to start looking out the windows because they're hearing words, 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 and they're not being given an opportunity. And again, another one with clients with special needs. Sometimes, if you'll ask them a direct question like out and honest, and this is one I particularly never use on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you feel today went? I don't use those questions, and I never have. I'm not comfortable with scaling. If someone asked me on a scale of 1 to 10 as an ADI, what number are you on? I wouldn't put it much above 6. Other people would say I'm about a 10 or maybe a 9. Um, but I don't feel comfortable with those questions, so why would I push them on to somebody else?
Yep.
Um, the other thing you can sometimes get is, particularly with some of the conditions, they become overwhelmed with information. And then they'll start making errors they've never made before. You might have got roundabouts up to a reasonable level, and because they're now coming up to a roundabout with more information coming at them, they can't handle it, and they then zone out, and then you have to take over and get them off the roundabout. Um, so there are lots of little things like that, but um, again, if you're talking about feelings, particularly people with anxiety don't really like to talk about their feelings. There are lots of hidden disabilities. I mean, one of my last clients was a young lady with autism and anxiety, and she got a physical problem as well. She had to learn to drive with her left leg, but she had been bullied her entire school life. But yeah, that so when with someone like that, I'm not going to become, you will do this and you will do that, because that's exactly what she doesn't need. So if we're going to sit there for 10 minutes having just a friendly chat about her dog, um, the fact that her house might be infested with mice or whatever. Um, that's a conversation we're going to have, and we'll sit there for as long as it takes for her to feel comfortable before we'll move away. Um, yeah, it was interesting because every other word, and she started doing it. She'd just be saying sorry every other word. Sorry, sorry, sorry. And then she started saying sorry to the car. But I was sort of like, well, never apologize. It's a sign of weakness. But of course, everything for her being bullied, she was always sorry. You sometimes get this with older females who are in abusive relationships. Um, they're very apologetic. They don't have a right for an opinion. So if you ask them a scaling question, they're not comfortable with that because they're not allowed to have an opinion. So sometimes I think ADIs can, scaling's great, and I know why ADIs use it. For me, it's not a comfortable thing. Um, but yeah, just looking at the body language. I mean, if you're an ADI, you know body language. If you don't, you're not going to be a very good ADI very long. Because you pick up on these unsaid clues. When you're talking to them, do they become defensive? Or are they open to information? Um, I don't sort of do a lot about body language, but I know enough to pick up when someone is feeling uncomfortable. And as I say, I think I had a lady some years ago. She was in her mid 30s, maybe 40s, and every lesson she would spend 10 minutes in the car telling me everything that had gone on at home since the last lesson. Now, I could have said, well, I don't want to hear about your personal life. Let's go. Would that have worked? I don't know because I'm not that person. Um, it's like people will say to me sometimes, "Oh, I've got a client starting who's autistic. What should I do?" Well, I can't tell you what to do. I'm not you, and you're not me. I don't know your strengths. I don't know your weaknesses. So for me to tell you, and again, every client is individual.
Yep.
If you met one person with autism, you met one person with autism. These people who say, "Oh yeah, do this, do that, do this, do that." Well, really, it's individual. Autistic traits are not only autistic. People with ADHD have the same traits. Um, I've never been tested for autism. I know I'm dyslexic and I know I'm ADD, but things like wearing labels in clothing. Now, I know a lot of autistic people don't wear labels in clothing. It distracts them. Same with ADHD. It's another one. So if they had a label inside their t-shirt, for example, their focus would be on the label and not on what they're doing. So they would, and I do this as well. I cut labels out of my t-shirts. Um, is that an autistic trait? Yes. Am I autistic? I don't think so, but I don't know. I might be. I've never been tested. Um, so it's easy to sort of label people, and again, some people need the label. I've met people with ADHD who once had told they're ADHD or dyslexic or whatever. Oh, that explains why I'm like this. But other people, they don't need the label and then not appreciated if and I know some ADOs who've done this. They've tried to label clients and the client doesn't appreciate being asked if they're autistic straight out.
I
That
can
that
see
can go
why.
down like a very big lead balloon.
Yep.
If someone volunteers it, I'll talk about it, but I'm not going to say, "Are you autistic?" I mean, on the phone calls recently, I suppose it's about the last 15 years that I've been avoiding taking out neurotypical clients or normal people, whatever normal is. Um, so I would not take on a client unless they got special educational needs, emotional needs, hearing impairment, or physical disabilities. Um, I decided that, say, about 10 or 15 years ago, that I would not fill up my car with people who didn't need my skill set. And the fact that the car is adapted for people with physical disabilities, I could teach 20 people a day just on automatic, and then those adaptations are doing nothing. And when someone who needs those adaptations contacts me, I can't take them on because I'm too full up with people who don't need what I do. So I made that decision to filter the so-called normal people out of my equation. So from that point of view, a lot of people do disclose to me on that first phone call what their conditions are. But certainly when I first started back in the 90s, as a like any driving instructor, I was teaching a manual car. I was teaching anyone to ring me up, anyone who'd pay me. You know, I wasn't too fussy back then. And it was any time, any place, anywhere. 10 o'clock at night. Yeah, I'll do that. Nowadays, I look at it and someone says, "Do you want to come out after 3 o'clock?" And nah, not interested in going out after 3 o'clock. Um, so yeah, you change as an ADI. Some people prefer to work fleet. Um, some people prefer to do blue light training. There are lots of specialists in the ADI field. It's not all just about disabilities and special educational needs. But yeah, hidden disabilities. How often do you sit there, someone parks in a disabled parking bay, and you see them walking away, and the back of your mind says they don't look disabled. But we haven't walked for a day in their shoes, so we don't know what their day has been like. It might look, this is a good day for them. They're having the best day in the world. And today they can walk into the shop without their crutches. Tomorrow they might be in bed all day in pain. So yeah, disabilities that are hidden. It's very easy to say that person doesn't look disabled. And I think there's a good sticker on this, and it says, "I know I don't look disabled, but you don't look stupid."
I think I've seen them doing the rounds on social media.
Yeah. You know, yeah, even places like Asda nowadays have got signs on the disabled toilet door to say, "Not all disabilities are visible." If someone's got a bowel problem, they might have to go into that disabled loo because they can't wait for the standard toilet, or they might need to go into that loo because they've got a bag and a catheter that they need to deal with, or an ostomy bag. These are things that, as driving instructors, we don't very often talk about those sort of things. You know, first time I ever come across it was a young man, 16, he was learning to drive under the mobility rules, and he'd got a central line going into his chest, and he'd also bagged. He'd got an ostomy. So yeah, it's something you don't think about as a driving instructor until you have to sort of think, I need to think about this a bit more now. You know, yeah, a question that I once asked, and someone said, "You can't ask that question." One of my questions on my first consultation is there any problems with the waterworks? Because it is much easier to deal with a slight embarrassment of asking than it is to deal with a situation where someone's lost control and peed all over your car seat. Because they will be a lot more embarrassed and you will be embarrassed as well, rather than asking the question to start with and maybe putting on some kind of seat cover that will save the seat from the downpour.
So have you found any ways to get this information? I know you mentioned it that it's on your initial consultation.
Yeah,
Have you found a way to manage this? I've started adding a few things to my inquiry forms. How do you manage that? Do you find that people are quite open with giving information? And I know you specialize in this, so I expect a lot of your clients
a
know
lot
what
of
they're
my clients are
getting.
coming to me because they've already had a bad experience with an ADI in the past. So they're much more open to being telling me what they need to tell me. Um, and I think because I won't take on clients if there isn't a special need, then they're very more willing to tell me. Because otherwise I won't take them on if they say, "Oh, I'm perfectly normal, I have no problems at all." Well, thank you very much. Here's Joe Bloggs' number. He'll look after you. You know, I have no problem. I have several numbers I pass on to people if they contact me about standard automatic tuition. I have about 3 or 4 phone numbers I can give them because, as I say, I don't want to tie my car up with that. Um, I send everyone a registration form. It's got the basic stuff on the beginning of the form, you know, name, address, phone number, mobile number, driving license number, da da da. And then it goes on to ask about very similar to the D1 form for for your driving license. And it asks about several conditions, and they're just yes or no answers. But there's also a box at the bottom that if they want to give me more information, they can do. Um, Most of my clients are quite happy to fill that in. Um, I suppose I've had 1 or 2 that were not happy to disclose. I'm quite happy to not to have all the information. But some of the time as well, I come across people who come to me for what we call familiarization training. They're a full license holder that's had a life-changing illness or accident. So they're now having to drive either using hand controls, a secondary control system, or drive with their left foot instead of their right foot. So they'll come to me from an assessment center. Now they will be generally given a report from the assessment center. It's up to them whether they share that report with me. 90% do, because it gives me much more information about their condition. And, does it make a difference whether someone's had a traumatic head injury or a stroke or they've been hit over the head with a club? Not really, because it's a head injury. But if you've had someone who's acquired the head injury through a car accident, what caused that accident? Was it something they were already going wrong before they had the accident? Which it could have been. There's no guarantee that they didn't have the accident because um, uh, of something that was already starting to go wrong. I always remember sitting next to a guy who was type 1 diabetic, and he hadn't told me, but he'd been out to physio that morning. He'd had a right leg amputation, so he was driving with the left foot gas and brake. And he'd come home from physio and not bothered eating anything. So about halfway through the lesson, I'm thinking he's not reacting to me today. He's just not on board. And we pulled over, found out that his blood sugar had dropped severely. Luckily, I carry Lucasade and glucose tabs in the car. That's because I'm type 2 diabetic as well. But on this occasion, it was very useful to get him some glucose very rapidly because I think if we'd wait for an ambulance or something like that, he might not have been conscious by the time they get there. But that lesson ended at that point. Obviously, we're not going to continue trying to get him to drive when he's on low blood sugar. We give him the Lucasade and the glucose tab, get him home as quickly as we can, test his blood sugar, and I'm going to stay there until I'm sure that he's okay to be left alone. I'm not going to drop him at the door. So fine, I've got another customer to get to. Bye. Um, I couldn't do that as a person. So yeah, I'll help him in. I'll get him to test his blood sugar, see, do you need toast or whatever? It could be simple as carbs. It could be that he's got some injection in the house that he needs to take. But yeah, I want to be happy that either he's fit enough or someone's coming to help him before I'll disappear. But
So
again, you don't. How many of us ask if the client's diabetic?
it's not a question I ask.
No. Um, I remember some years ago, it was when I was teaching manual before I decided to specialize, and I'm teaching two friends, and they both worked at Morrison's, and the one said, "Oh, you teach studied at it?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "We had to get the ambulance for him the other day. He had a hypo." And there's bells ringing in the head. So when I get home, I phone, we'll call him Tom for the sake of, and I asked him about it. And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Did you inform the DVLA that you're type 1 diabetic?" And he said, "I think so." Now, that's clearly a warning flag right there. I think so. Well, I'd like you to notify the DVLA. And when you notify the DVLA, then we'll start lessons again. But until you notify the DVLA, then basically you've got a fraudulent license because you didn't disclose the fact that you're a type 1 diabetic. If you're type 2 and not using insulin, you don't have to tell the DVLA, but type 1 certainly needs to tell the DVLA. There was an argument, oh, must be a couple of years ago. We'd always argued about the fact that with the autistic spectrum, it was left up to the learner driver to decide whether they needed to disclose their autism. And the DVLA's comment was, does it affect your driving? Now you've got someone who's never really driven. How do they know whether their autism affects their driving? Um, so the DVLA a couple of years ago decided we're going to change that. Anyone with autism has to notify us. Well, over the space of one weekend, that changed completely because the British Autistic Society, because it was a retrospective thing as well. So if someone had got a license for 25 years because they were autistic and they passed the test and everything, no problem. But now the DVLA decides that they've got to notify the DVLA that they're autistic. And yeah, it hit the fan. And by the end of the weekend, DVLA had completely reversed and back to, if it affects you, tell us. But a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, how do they know whether their autism affects their driving? Because they're not a driver.
Yeah.
I remember one lad, and he notified the DVLA because he'd already got his license. And they just sent him a letter back. Does it affect your driving? And he just ticked the box. No. Um, so yeah, it's a very awkward thing with autism. Some conditions are quite clear. You must notify the DVLA. If you're epileptic or you have a heart condition and you have a pacemaker fitted, there's no doubt about that. You tell the DVLA. But a lot of the um, educational needs, it's if it affects your driving, tell us. How do they know? They can't possibly know.
To me, it doesn't make much sense in all honesty, because if it affects their driving, then I expect they're not going to be driving. But things like diabetes and being epileptic and the other ones, they're kind of managed medically. And I
Yeah,
don't know too much about autism, but I feel the impact is not necessarily going to be the same. If someone's not got their diabetes under control,
Yeah.
or they've just been diagnosed. Their blood sugars are going to be all over the place, and they can be having hypos, they can be having hypers. So it seems odd that they ask about autism because I feel if it affects their driving, it's going to be picked up through the training, whereas other medical conditions,
Um,
it's an odd one.
the distinction the DVLA make about learning, if you have a learning difficulty, you can obtain a license. If you have a learning disability, which means you cannot learn, then you won't be issued with a license.
Okay.
So a learning difficulty means I might take longer to learn. I might need a different approach. I might take hours and hours and hours of tuition to get competent. But a learning disability means that I cannot learn. It's the same when someone's had a head injury, whether it's acquired or through a stroke. Sometimes they're very okay driving around a nursery route. They can handle that. But when they come to a complex junction where they need to step up that cognitive to the executive level, where you've got cars coming from four different directions and you've got to decide where you're going and what you're doing. Some people with head injuries just then that's their limit, and they will sit there for an extraordinary long period of time trying to decide whether it's safe to go or not. At a small junction where you may only have one or two cars coming, they're okay, they can deal with that. But then you bring them onto a situation where, as I say, you've got traffic coming from four different directions, including there's five if you include the one they're traveling from. And then they just can't initiate that executive decision that it's, oh, the pedestrian crossing stopped traffic over there so I can go. They've lost that ability in their cognitive functioning.
Is that
So
when
it
you come in with the assessments?
the assessment would have been done at this point. They would have said there's a potential to return to driving. Very often with the assessments, they'll never give a clear cut. But it's what they'll do is they'll give the person an opportunity, probably as much as 3 months, to see if there can be an improvement in their condition, an improvement in their driving. Some on assessment, it's a definite no. We're not going any further with this assessment. This is far enough. Some there's a potential there, but maybe they're using a new, they're driving with their left leg rather than their right leg, or they're driving with hand controls rather than their legs. And there's more of a cognitive load because they're having to think about how to use their body, which they've been doing for 28 years in a certain way. So, yeah, it's what the assessment centre will then give them is what we call a provisional disability assessment license with tuition. And that will then give them potentially up to 3 months to retrain and then come back to the assessment centre and pass or fail the assessment. Um, some people realize very early on that they're not going to be able to make that improvement and they self-terminate. Um, some people, you have to advise them that they're not going to reach that standard. And that's an extremely difficult conversation to have. Um, Again, it would become very personal. You're taking away my ability to get out and about. You're taking away my ability to go to the shops. Yet, while they had their stroke, they had plenty of people taking them places that they needed to, but suddenly now I'm the one taking away their ability. It's not my decision. After the training, I will write a report. They will go back to the assessment centre, and the assessment centre will make an assessment and a report, and then the DVLA make the decision. We only put our view, our assessment in of what we see. The decision maker is the DVLA. They have a medical board which includes doctors, medical professionals, and they will make the decision whether the license is reissued or revoked. Sometimes it's quite obvious to the person that they self-revoke or surrender their license, which in the long run is the best thing for them to do, because it's much easier to get your license back if you've surrendered it than if it's been revoked. So say, for instance, I have another spinal injury and I can't walk for 6 months, and I surrender my license. When I'm ready to go back on the road, I can ask the DVLA to send me my license back, because I surrendered it voluntarily. Now, if the DVLA have taken my license away, there's a much harder system to get your license back.
So if you surrender your license yourself, do you still have to go through the assessments, or can you almost
It would depend on the medical
self-certify?
condition.
Okay.
Spinal injury. Let's go there because I can talk about that personally. My spinal injury is L4, L5, C6, C7 incomplete, which means I can walk around and I have somewhat feeling in my legs. A complete injury, they have no function in their lower body from the injury down. So do I need to notify the DVLA? No, because I can drive a manual car just like I could when I was 16. But I don't want to drive a manual car for more than about 10 minutes because it bloody well hurts. So because I can still drive a manual car, then my assessment would be, yeah, he can still drive a manual car, so he doesn't have to have his license restricted in any way. But for instance, if I could not drive a manual car, I could only drive an automatic, then my license would be restricted to automatic only. If I couldn't use my feet to control the car, accelerator, brake, clutch, then I would have to use hand controls, then that would be coded on my license and it would be limited to automatic with modified gas modified brake system. And that would appear as a couple of codes on the back of my license. So it'd be code 10, code 20, and 25. If I lost some use in the upper limb, say I was a tetraplegic injury around the mid chest, and I'd lost some strength in my arms, I had to have light and power steering and aids on the steering wheel for me to steer, then they would have to code those as well. So that would be code 40 and 35s. So yeah, it does depend on the person as an individual. So because I can still drive a manual vehicle, then I have no restriction on my license. But if the injury had left me with only the ability to drive an automatic, then it would be limited. And the same if I was only able to use hand controls, or I was unable to steer without it being light and power steering or steering aid, then there would be codes added for those things. So it's a robust system, but the coding, very often there's arguments over what should be coded and what shouldn't be coded. Like, if it's a feature on the car, say for instance, I've got city steering on my car. Now, that's a function of the car. I'm not having an adaptation fitted. It's a function that's already there on the vehicle. So should that be coded? Well, the answer should be no. But if I've had my car they've taken the steering rack off and they've adjusted the steering rack, so now I can steer like this, just a finger, then yes, that's light and power steering and it should be coded. And then I can only drive a vehicle with that adaptation. I shouldn't have gone into disabilities, should I? Sorry. I went down that rabbit hole again, didn't I?
It's fascinating the amount of experience that you've got, like they're just reeling off the codes and what links with what. I'm not sure how many people have got that much experience that they've got that off the bat. But where who's responsible for this kind of stuff if someone goes to a test with adaptations?
Um,
Are you offering advice as the instructor? Is the examiner figuring it out of the
I will
DVLA?
always send an email to the test center manager with my recommendations and ask for reasonable adjustments to the driving test. For instance, if I'm driving with with a secondary control system and I've only got one hand, while I'm driving, I'm got one hand on the secondary control system. I can't open and close the window. That's one of the show me on the moves. So we would ask the examiner to ask one of the other show me's rather than ask for the window to be opened. Again, in my car, particularly if I was only driving with one hand, and I would switch the lights on at the beginning of the journey, because for my secondary control device, I can go high-low on the beams, but I can't turn the lights on. Now, if I spend some more money, about another £500, I could have the lights fitted to the secondary control system. But do I need it if I can turn the lights on with one hand at the beginning of the lesson? I've got a late. I am retired, but I've still got some clients. Um, had a lady last week who had an accident. She traumatically lost her right arm in the accident, and she's now learning to drive with a secondary control device. So she discovered about mid-lesson that she couldn't get the sun visor down while she's moving. Now, the way I would deal with that, I would put the sun visor down before I started the journey. If that was ever a potential, if it's middle of December, then I'm not probably going to bother with the sun visor. Or the other thing I might do if I'm driving with one arm would be when I stop very briefly at a junction, I could put the heated rear window or the heated front window on very quickly and then carry on with my driving. So if I choose when I do things, I can manage to do things without having to actually physically pull onto the side of the road. But for example, if I was driving with one arm and I was going to join the motorway, I would want those lights on before I join the motorway because I might not have an opportunity to pull up and turn the lights on with one arm while I'm driving on the motorway. So, um, again, this is something I talk about with my clients is what ifs. You've got one arm, you can't open and close that window. How are you going to do it? Well, if I stop briefly at the traffic lights, I can just lean over, operate, and then back to my steering device with my left hand. Again, if it was the other way around, it was only got my right arm, and I wanted to put my parking brake on, and I could lean over with my right arm while I'm stationary and put the parking brake on. My car, if you just touch the accelerator, the parking brake disengages. So, but if I hadn't got a vehicle that disengaged automatically, then I probably wouldn't put the parking brake on while I'm sitting at a set of traffic lights because I then got to lean over, disengage it, then back to the steering wheel and then off. So it depends on the vehicle you're driving as well. If you've got automatic lights or automatic wipers, you're not going to need them on your secondary control or shouldn't need them on your secondary control. But most of the time, there are a couple of players in the market of secondary. Well, there's more than a couple, but there are two big ones. And they have very similar systems. The middle of the range system operates indicators, horn, high-low beams, front and rear wipers and washers. It can operate some other functions as well. Sometimes you can get hazard warning lights fitted to the device. But again, the more you want on it, you can have as much as you want on it. You can have 20 functions, but it costs you more money. A lot of people don't think about this, but yeah, a basic system for a driver using either a steering ball or a lollipop with the switches on them, that's 1,500 quid. They don't have to pay VAT on it, but yeah, it's 1,500 quid. If they get in the car through the Motability Scheme, then they would only be asked to make a contribution towards that. They wouldn't have to pay the full amount. But if you've got someone who doesn't, like, if you've got an arm amputated, you don't qualify for Motability because you can walk more than 20 meters.
Okay.
Because no problem with your legs, just your upper body that's damaged. And for PIP, it's about the ability to get around. So, someone with a traumatic amputation, they can walk around normally. Their legs are okay, but they haven't got one arm. So they would have to foot the bill for that secondary control device on their own vehicle. They they wouldn't qualify for the Motability scheme unless they were in receipt of enhanced rate personal independence payment, which they probably wouldn't get if they can walk more than 20 meters.
So it
It's
becomes quite expensive.
Yeah, obviously they're not going to pay VAT. If they've got a personal vehicle and they're classified as disabled, then they don't pay road tax. So there are some benefits, um, but yeah, adaptations. I suppose though, if you look at 1,500 quid over 3 years, it's only £500 a year. Uh, if you're going to change your car every 6 months, then it's going to be very expensive. Very often, with the adaptations, a lot of companies won't move them from vehicle to vehicle because of liability. These things have been tested as brand new products. They've not been tested as second-hand products. So their liability insurance won't cover them to. You might have two vehicles that are exactly the same, but if I'm taking the controls out of this vehicle and putting them into that vehicle, they're now a second user. So is it guaranteed the same way that it would be as the original product? Is the liability there? And a lot of adaptation companies just say, no, we're not going to
Buy
allow.
another one.
Yeah. It seems quite awful because a lot of Motability cars do get put into the auction with adaptations, and those adaptations are usually pulled out and destroyed, which is shameful. Even if we sent them to a third world country, where somewhere where there's a lot of landmines blowing people's legs off, those adaptations might be very useful to someone in a third world country, rather than being cut into little bits and just sold to the scrap man. Um, yeah, sometimes I must not get on my soapbox on that. It
So
does
while
seem,
we've got on to disabilities and we've
yeah,
done
sorry,
a bit on hidden disabilities and um, visual disabilities and physical disabilities, and we've covered a lot, but with obviously a lot of the audience are ADIs or PDIs,
yeah.
and is there a need for more people offering the service that you currently offer? How does that look for people that need this additional support?
For instance, until recently, I was the only ADI in Shropshire offering the service. Many of our ADIs are the only ADI in their area offering this service. Um, there are some parts of the country where you might have to wait 6 months to get an instructor because the instructor is that busy that he will put you on the waiting list and he'll get to you as soon as he can. But yeah, it could be 6 months before he actually takes you on. Now, I'm lucky that a young lady in just the next town has taken on some disability work, so I can take a back seat a little bit and only do the jobs I want to do. But yeah, sometimes it's difficult saying to someone, I can take you on, but I have to wait for a gap to appear in my diary before I can do that. And again, as a disabled person myself, I don't work 6, 7 hours a day, which I used to do when I was in my 30s. Um, I will only work a maximum of 3 hours a day. That's 3 working hours, not 3 hours from going out to coming back. So I will only do 3 clients in a day. But for me, that is me knackered, to be perfectly honest. Um, my own spinal injury, it does affect my ability to work. Which is something I always wanted more hours in a day that I was available to work, but I couldn't do that. Um, this young lady has now taken on teaching with adaptations, which has allowed me to semi-retire. I'm supposed to be retired, but I'm still quite active in the ADI, PDI industry. Um, but yeah, we would disabled people need more ADIs to, even if it's only teaching special educational needs where they don't have to have any adaptations to their car. At the end of the day, that's the way I started. I was only teaching people with educational needs. Then I started teaching people with steering ball because they had upper limb problems. Then I got into teaching people using hand controls, and then I got a bit deeper into it and a bit deeper into it until in the end I was down that rabbit hole with the white rabbit. Uh, but yeah, as I say, even if it's just someone who can help special educational needs, we've got ADIs in my Facebook group who don't do the physical side of things like I do, the adaptations. They just do the educational needs because that's what they like. That's what they prefer to do. Some of them we've managed to edge over into doing adaptation work. Sorry, Gary, if you're listening. But yeah, we're always trying to get more people involved because there's a short supply of ADIs doing this job. I'd like to see at least 3 in Shropshire. You know, there were times when I would have to drive, if the client couldn't come to me, I would have to drive for an hour to them, do a 90-minute or 2 hour lesson because you've got to do that to go that far. You can't go there for 40 minutes. And then drive an hour back. That's half your day gone to do one client. So certainly towards the end, most of my clients were coming to me, either by train, car, bus, and I'd meet them at the local garden centre or the railway station, and then we would do the lesson from there. Because I could see more people in a day if they were coming to me than if I had to drive around and go to them. You
Yeah.
know, in half a day I do one person, whereas in half a day I can do 2 or 3 people. So very often when I explain that to most of my clients, they would then find that Joe from next door can drive them over to Shrewsbury once a week. I think the longest distance I had someone travel was from Gibraltar.
That's
Um,
that's a bit of a commute.
yeah, he came over for a weekend and we did all the tuition over a weekend. Um, he was an army man and he'd had his right leg amputated. And it was nothing to do with being in the army. After leaving the army, he'd gone to work in a factory and got run over by a forklift truck and lost his right leg. He laughed about it, which soldiers tend to do. You know, 30 years people shooting at me and then I get run over in a factory by a forklift truck. Um, they have this sort of sense of humor that sometimes we don't understand. Or we think, oh, that's a bit risky, that's a bit near the bone. But they're very, I always remember people talking about not driving with artificial limbs. And at the time, there was a bunch of guys doing these off-road four-wheel drive rallying, and all of them were amputations. Um, so yeah, if they want to do it, they'll do it.
So where can we go? How do we get into this? If anyone's watching or listening and they're interested in offering this support, or at least, like you said, starting maybe with the educational needs and then progressing like you did, where would you start? Where would you go?
The first place would be to join the Facebook group if you're on Facebook, ADIs with and for disability. Um, After that, a lot of the disability driving assessment centres do offer training. They offer open days. We offer our special educational needs disability course online. The QEF used to offer a course down in Carshalton, which is Surrey. So there are places to go. I've even done training days myself where people have come along and we've talked about disabilities and gone through the adaptations. But the first place would be to join the Facebook group. Once you're in the Facebook group, then just ask the question, where can I get training? I believe there's an open night tomorrow night on Facebook for theory test questions in my group. One of the ADIs who also works at the Driving Mobility Assessment Centre is having an open mic event. And he said he's willing to answer any questions. I thought that's a bit strong. That's going a long way from what we're doing. But yeah, our website, disabilitydrivinginstructors.com, starts off with three W's. On there, we've got loads of help and advice and help sheets. Say, for instance, you're an ADI and someone approaches you, they've had a stroke or an acquired head injury. There's on our website, there's a information sheet that you can read, download. We used to have them in the group, but having them in two places and keeping them updated was fairly difficult. So now we decided just to have the information sheets on the website so that they only have to be updated once rather than have them in the group and have them on the website. So it was a much less work for John to update one file rather than two or three files. So yeah, if you go to the website, there's loads of help and advice. The idea of the website, it's a one-stop shop for a disabled person. They can get the information they need about returning to driving or starting to driving if they've never driven. There's a find your nearest specialist driving instructor. Now, we'd like a lot more people to be on that register, but it's surprising how many people don't want to spend the price of one driving lesson on registering. You know, if you take a line entrance, it's £30 a year. If you take an enhanced entry, then it's £50 a year, which is basically one driving lesson nowadays. Um, why people object to spending that amount of money. And I'm no longer on the website because I'm no longer actively looking for new clients, although I still acquire them. But I always looked at paying that £50 as paying it forward. I'm not paying that £50 to be on the website. I'm paying that £50 so that people who need it, the disabled person, can find the information they need because the website is there. And that's why I used to pay my £50. I'll probably still make donations. It's recently I went to a advanced driving group to give a presentation, and they made a donation to the Disability Driving Instructors website. So I still make contributions, even though I might not be paying my £50. I certainly get donations for them. As I say, a line entry to £30, not even a driving lesson nowadays. I mean, what's the average price? £40 now, isn't it?
I think so.
Um,
It depends who you ask and in what Facebook group.
yeah, I mean, I know there are some driving instructors still charging around £30 an hour, um, mainly because of the area they're working in. But we're talking about £30 one driving lesson. The enhanced entry £50, 1.5 hours of driving tuition. Um, like myself, from that website, I used to get 5 or 6 inquiries a week, and they were from people who weren't in my area because they'd look. And again, on the internet, my name probably comes up quite a lot when people are looking for driving with disabilities. So a lot of people contact me, and I'll pass the work on to someone who's local to them. And it's the same with John. Now John's no longer teaching as an ADI. He will pass on that information to an ADI who is working in that area. With the adaptations, disability driving instructors have negotiated a discount so that there are discounts for the adaptations, so the driving instructor doesn't have to pay the full whack to get the adaptations fitted to the vehicle. I think to a basic car, they could get the left foot accelerator and the push-pull hand controls for around £500 or £600 plus VAT. I think the Lodgings, which, as I mentioned earlier on, is around £1,500 to the punter. We can get that as a driving instructor at around 50% off. We can get that for about £800 plus VAT. That's a significant saving. There are companies that offer free devices. You just have to pay for them to be fitted. I know one of the old guys, one of the ADIs, he never paid for any adaptations in his entire career. They were fitted by a local adaptation company. It's like anything, someone learns to drive with, I'm trying not to use names, but they learn to drive with Gosling's hand controls, then they're going to specify Gosling's hand controls when they buy their own car. So these companies sometimes look at driving instructors and think, if we give them a set of free controls, then we get referrals. I worked very closely with the adaptation company near Shrewsbury, and if someone asked me about adaptations, then yes, I would have referred them there. So yeah, I scratched his back, he scratched mine. Certainly on my last, I didn't pay as much as he gave me a good discount on the adaptations. So there are deals available. You don't have to pay the full whack. I would like to see the government give us some break on it. A disabled person doesn't have to pay VAT on disability adaptations. We're not fitting them in the car for our own good. We're fitting them in the car for disabled people. So it'd be nice if we didn't have to pay the VAT on them. But I don't think the government are listening to me on that one.
I mean, well, we'll not go down that rabbit hole, but I don't think the government knows which way's up at the moment. But we will we'll leave that one there.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, and I think, like you said, there's a need for more ADIs going into this line of work. And it's got to be a challenge if people can't find specialists local, then they're traveling further afield, and it's a 6 to 12 month wait. It must be a challenge for
Oh
those
yeah.
people that need it as well. So
You
you've
know,
mentioned the website and sorry,
yeah,
everything else. I know you guys run some courses as well. Is that
yeah.
an introduction to
The next
teaching?
course we
How
start.
does that work?
Yeah, next course we're starting on the 9th of April, and the first night is an introduction into what we do, and then the following 5 nights, I think, cover various special educational needs. Each night is about well, we plan on 2 hours. It usually goes to 2.5 hours. Because with the Zoom, we're willing to take questions and answer them as well as we can. In special educational needs, we have a young lady joining us who's she's a autistic assessor for young children. And she's also dyspraxic. She learned to drive with me, and she came on as a case study, and we went through how my approach was completely different to other driving instructors who tried to teach her in the past. And the fact that for 17 years she'd been learning to drive, and she did it within, I think it was about 4 or 5 months with me. So yeah, we run the first 5 modules is on special educational needs. Then I think it's about the 14th of May, we start the medical educational needs. And then we finish that up with a hands-on day at one of the assessment centres where the ADIs can come along and drive vehicles with adaptations. Some of the guys we talked to have never seen an adaptation, leave alone drive with one. So it's what we do. We've usually got quite a few ADIs along who've got adapted cars, and we usually have 2-person per car. And we take them out, let them use the controls, let them have a bit of play with them. And we also do some education on that day. And the last one, again, we had a case study come along, a young man with cerebral palsy, and he come along and talked about how he and his driving instructor actually worked together to get him to his test. He's passed his test now. The first time I met him, he was going towards his test, but now he's passed his test. So we sort of had a whip around and bought him a pair of trainers that he thought were brilliant. I don't know, one trainer is the same as another to me, but apparently these trainers were boss or whatever. Sick. One of these new fangled words that the youngsters use. But yeah, you can find the information on the website for the training course, which again is www.disabilitydrivinginstructors.com. Or you can join the ADI group, ADI's with and for disability Facebook group, and the information is in that group about the training courses. It's £35 per unit. So one night is £35. But that's for two usually over 2 hours of training. The final day is, I think, at the moment around £75 to £80. But that is a whole day, and it's practical, hands-on training with the adaptations. Usually on that one, as a group, we go down the night before. We stay in a hotel and we have a bit of a social evening with the people who are coming along to the course. I remember one of the guys on our last course, Craig, he said he'd worked for the NHS for 10 years. And he learnt more on our course than he ever learnt working for the NHS for 10 years. So for that sort of recommendation, it's not a bad course. I think I'm told you're looking at 20 odd hours of continuous professional development. That should keep you happy for about 3 or 4 registrations on the DVSA website. You know, their use of CPD.
Yes, that's on
I think
the
they said 4
registration.
years, 4 hours for 4 years.
I'm not sure what the requirement is. I think I'm ticking the boxes off doing these podcasts. I reckon that's me sorted for CPD.
Yeah, I would say you don't have to pay for it. You're getting it free of charge. But yeah, I mean, it must be about 10 years ago, they again talked about CPD becoming compulsory. And we all got very much involved in CPD, and then it was the DASA at that time. It wasn't the DVSA, it was a driving standards agency. Decided, oh, well, we're not going to bother with CPD now. The idea was that if you did CPD, you wouldn't have to do your check test or your standards check, as it was. Or you wouldn't have a standards check as often if you were seen to be doing continuous professional development. They even put down that the standards check is continuous professional development. I would think that's a stretch. Certainly the guy who took me on my last standards check, he had zero idea about what I did. He said himself, he said, I couldn't teach the people you teach, but I'll mark you down as a grade B. I missed a grade A by 2 points, which was rather spitting feathers time. But it's a grade, and it allows me to do what I do without being bothered for the next. I think I'm about 7 years since my last standards check, so I must be due one soon. Um, but if I retire next January properly, then I wouldn't have to do another one.
I thought you'd already retired.
Yeah, um, I have found that retirement is really boring.
So we'll see you for a standards check early next year.
Yeah, somewhere around there probably. But I will make up my mind whether I do the DBS this year. But yeah, the trouble is, I do like the job. I say job, but to be perfectly honest, it's more vocation. Um, my wife will tell you if you ever speak to her, I do get personally involved with most of my clients. That I get very invested in their ability to pass a test. Um, and since I've not been actively teaching every day, yeah, I've become very grumpy. She says,
Time
uh,
to fill the diary, is it?
well, she said I can do a couple of days a week. So, so maybe I'll do just a couple of days a week.
Keep you active.
Keep me active. Yeah, I really with nothing to do. Again, if you're involved in this side of the business, it does become a vacation. It becomes part of what you are. And suddenly you're not. The phone call doesn't ring anymore. Nobody asks me any questions. And yeah, it was hard. Bloody hard. But yeah, I love still being involved in the Facebook group and still being involved in the CPD courses. Um, I don't make any real money from it, but um, yeah, I'm not going to give it up anytime soon. If an ADI writes to me on Facebook or whatever and asks me a question, I'm going to do my damnedest to give him the information I can. As I say, I can't tell him how to teach his client. I can tell him what may have worked for me in the past, and they might try those things that worked for me in the past, but I can't say you will teach client X and he will have this, that, and that problem because I don't know client X. As I say, when I was talking before with you, I don't know your strengths and weaknesses. So I can't tell you how to do a driving lesson. It would be very, what's the word? Oh, I can't think of the word, but it, I'd be very arrogant to think I could teach you to teach someone to drive. Um, I can tell you what's worked for me in the past, but I can't tell you how to teach your client. And very often that's the question I'm asked. How can I go forward with this client? And I can only suggest what I've used in the past and what may have worked with that client. And it might work with your client, but it might not. And the beauty of the group is because you're not getting advice from one expert, we've probably got hundreds of years experience of ADIs in the group who are 30 years into the business. Some are 20 years in, some are less. But, there's a lot there that got 30 years involved in the business of teaching disabled people to drive. So you're getting more than one opinion and more than one try this. You know, um, some of the things I've said to other people in the past, they then suggest to somebody else. So you see it coming around and going around this pool of knowledge. Um, but again, I might not have the thing that works for your client. But one of the other guys might make a suggestion that then works with your client. I mean, we've got, just to name a few, we've got John Brown, 30 odd years as an ADI specializing in disabilities. Peter Carey, again, 30 odd years specializing in disabilities. John Rogers, he's the godfather of disabilities and special education, and he's teaching. Harry's not been at it very long, but I think it's about 10 or 15 years Harry's been involved in driving instruction. But again, you'll sometimes see him talking about some of the things I've suggested to him. So you think, yeah, this is coming back. This information is like, it's not just a one-way street, it's a pool of knowledge. And if I'd have had the resource of the Facebook group when I learned to become a driving instructor, of any of the Facebook groups, even some of the PDI ones that won't let me in because I'm not a PDI. But yeah, the Facebook can be a great advantage, but it can also be a disadvantage when you get the AAA plus ADIs giving their view of these. That's a stupid question to ask. I often say to people, there's no stupid questions. Because if you don't know the answer, the way to get it is to ask. So just because someone's heard that question 500 times in the last 2 years doesn't make it a stupid question. If the person hasn't got that information, and as ADIs and teachers, shouldn't we be giving them that information without saying, oh, well, that's a stupid bloody question? I don't think any of us would sit in the car when asked by a client a question, we'd say, well, that's a bloody stupid question.
I'd hope not.
And if we did it on standard check, we wouldn't last 5 minutes.
No.
So why do these ADIs in Facebook groups think they can? I won't say what they're measuring, but they're measuring things.
It does become a challenge, depending on what group you're in and who's
Yeah,
commenting and what's going on. But what we can do is we'll make sure that your Facebook group is put in the description so people can find all the information that they need, along with the website for the course that's coming up next
yep.
month. But what I would like to do now, if we can, is go through some
Oh,
tell me questions.
yeah, yeah, okay.
Should we see how we get on with these?
Okay.
So the first one, can you tell me what car you drive if it was the only car you could drive forever?
Well, I did mention the Alfa Romeo 147 because it's got such a sexy front end. Uh, but I think I'd struggle to get in it nowadays, to be perfectly honest, because it's a bit low to the ground. But Alfa Romeo's got the most beautiful front ends of any car in the world. They look beautiful. I've had an Alfa in the past, and yeah, they're nice cars, but they do tend to rot rather well. But yeah, Alfa Romeo would probably be or second choice would probably be an Extreme Land Rover.
Okay.
Probably about an 80-inch wheelbase, and with extreme suspension and so on and so forth, and do a bit of off-roading.
So you can just go anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah, basically.
Nice. Can you tell me if you could deliver a driving lesson to anyone, who would it be?
Um, you probably never heard of this guy, but there's a guy called Colonel Jeff Cooper. He basically invented practical pistol shooting. And when I was shooting, he was one of my all-time heroes. Unfortunately, he's passed nowadays, so he's no longer with us. But yeah, I would, if I was having a lesson from him and giving him a lesson in driving as well, that would be a perfect day.
Nice. Learn some skills while you're teaching some of yours.
Yeah. I used to be quite involved in the pistol shooting world. And yeah, he was speed, surprise, and get things done rather than taking your time over aiming and shooting.
Let instinct take over.
Yeah, it's basically point shooting. You know, if you point your finger at something, 99% of the time, your finger will be pointed directly at what you're pointing at. And you just got to make the gun an extension of your finger.
It's always good fun, especially with the pistol. It's been
Yeah.
a while since I've been on the range.
I spent 30 years pistol shooting until we lost the ability to pistol shoot in this country. Uh, after Dunblane, unfortunately. Um, I won't get political on that one. But yeah, we lost the ability to compete as handgun shooters after Dunblane. It is now very, very difficult to be a firearm certificate holder in this country without jumping through a number of hoops.
Yes, I was quite fortunate. I got to play with a lot of rifles, pistols, however many weapons while I was in the RAF. So that
Yeah,
was interesting. Pistol was always a challenge for people, but we'll not delve too much into that
no,
or into the politics. But that's an interesting answer that you're offering your services to get a lesson off a specialist in their field.
yeah.
Nice. Can you tell me the best piece of advice you ever received?
Buy the car that suits you rather than the car to teach people in.
Ah, okay.
Um, Remembering that you're going to be in that car more hours a day than any of your learners. So buy a car you're comfortable in. If you like it and you're enthusiastic about that car, your pupils will like it and be enthusiastic about it. If you don't like being in that car, that will come across to your clients and your clients will pick up on that and they won't like the car either. So yeah, when I first started, I went down the route of Austin Metro, followed by Rover Metros, followed by Rover 200s, until I got involved in automatic teaching. Then I moved away from that side of things. But yeah, the best piece of advice I ever got was buy a car that you like, because you're going to be in it hours a day. The client's only going to be in it 1 or 2 hours at maximum. So buy a car that you like and you're
That's
comfortable in.
That's a great piece of advice. I see that come up quite a lot. What car should I get? What car's best for teaching? And I
Yeah,
think that answer kind of sums it up. It's your office, you're in it all day,
I,
get what
I
you want.
the answer was given to me by another ADI that I used to go to a lot of meetings with local ADI. He's no longer teaching, unfortunately. He's got Parkinson's nowadays. But yeah, it was his advice he gave me. He said, buy the car you like. Because yeah, when I first started, didn't know anybody. Um, the driving school cars at the time, I think Nissan Micra, Ford Fiesta, Austin or Rover Metro. I think BSM used all metros anyway, didn't they? So
Don't know.
metros were popular back then. But yeah, I had this little tiny white metro that, oh God, I think about it nowadays. It was very good because it got glass all around it. The later metros become thicker on the door pillars because of safety, but certainly the all early British Leyland or Austin metros were certainly less less door pillars and more visibility. So as a car to teach in regards to visibility, they were brilliant, but they were horrible little cars. I think they had the Valeo clutch on them, which lasted about 18,000 miles if you were lucky.
Great for an instructor.
Yeah. And it was a specialist clutch that you could only get fitted at Austin garages, and a lot of other garages wouldn't touch them. And the hydroelastic suspension, which again, yeah, it, it it was not a nice car really. But I think my first three cars were Metros because I trained to become a driving instructor in the Metro. So Metros were what I knew. And then when they stopped making the Metros and they brought out the Rover 200s, that was just really the Honda 214, I think it was. They made it into the Rover 200 and 214, and it was just a Honda, but it was badged as a Rover. They were
Would have been reliable though.
a lot better than the Metros. But once I became into automatic, I think the first car I got was a mini MPV, which was the Mitsubishi Space Star,
Okay.
based on the Colt, and it was a very nice car. But at the time when I got it, like it was an estate car, basically, MPV, and everyone was sort of, well, you can't use that for a driving school car. It was only that much wider than the Rover 200 anyway. So what difference did it make? But yeah, certainly riding it was a lot different. And a lot of examiners said, oh, it's nice to get in this car rather than one of those little ones.
Makes a difference, eh? So we'll get on with the next one. Can you tell me your favorite book?
I can tell you the first book I ever read from cover to cover, The Red Pony by John Steinbeck.
Okay.
When I left school, as I say, I was functionally illiterate. And I bought that book on the day I left school. And it probably took me about 5 years to read it from cover to cover. And it's a brilliant book. And it's the first book I'd ever read from cover to cover without being threatened, in other words, to read it. So yeah, The Red Pony by John Steinbeck.
Nice. It's not one I've heard of. I will be having a Google later. Have a look what it is.
I mean, nowadays I read a lot of Lee Child, which is the Jack Reacher novels. But yeah, I suppose if I only had one book, The Red Pony would probably be the book. I've still got it here somewhere.
Nice. Can you tell me one message you would give someone who's thinking of becoming a driving instructor?
Find a niche, find a small pole. Rather than trying to be a driving instructor for everybody, dealing with the 16-year-old L driver market, 17-year-old, sorry. I'm thinking of my side of the business being 60. And you're competing with, I know in Shrewsbury there's 100 driving instructors. It's a very small town in comparison, but we've got 100 ADIs working in Shrewsbury. There was only one ADI teaching with special educational needs and disability equipment. So if you can, find a niche to work in. It could be doing fleet training. It could be teaching the military. It could be doing blue light training. But if you can find a niche where you're not competing with everybody else, you're going to do better and probably have a much more rewarding time. For me, I'd say, yeah, get involved in disabilities and special educational needs. It's brilliant. And the times I've gone home after a test with a shit-eating grin on my face. Um, and I've been smiling all the way home from the test centre. You know, it's a brilliant feeling. Um, did I ever get that feeling with normal learner drivers? No. I enjoyed them passing their test, but um, I didn't enjoy it in the way I do these days. Maybe it's because I teach less people. Certainly back in the 90s when I was teaching everybody, then yeah, I was 8 in the morning till 8 at night and coming home wrecked, to be perfectly honest. Um,
Yeah, it's listening to the body, isn't it, with the
yeah,
hours worked.
yeah. You can't burn both ends of a candle and expect it to be a candle. You know, again, you run a motor on avgas and it'll blow up eventually. You can only push things so far before something breaks. For me, it eventually was the spinal injury that came back from when I was riding a motorbike when I was 16 and had an accident. I didn't know it at the time that I'd damaged my spine. I got up and walked away with a fracture. Um, Years later, it came back and kicked me in the arse, as it were, because I'd been pushing my body too far.
Got to look after ourselves, haven't we?
Yeah,
So the next one, can you
yep.
tell me one piece of advice you would give a student before their driving test?
Keep on the black stuff. Bring it back in one piece. No, basic. Seriously, I tell people to drive like they've got somewhere to be. but not like they're late.
Nice.
That's generally my advice to learners. You've got somewhere to be. Don't dawdle, but don't drive like you're late for an appointment.
Great
And
advice there for students.
it's the way I drive. I drive with a a time to arrive in my mind. Some days it's a very open window of when I'm going to arrive somewhere, but on others, yeah, if I'm going to pick someone up at 9 o'clock, I'll be there at 10 to. That has always been my standard operating procedure. 9 o'clock means 10 to 9 to me. And if they come out early, then we just start the lesson early, finish it early. But one thing I've always done is I allowed at least 30 minutes between clients.
Yep.
Now, I can get from one side of Shrewsbury to the other in about 15 minutes. So really, I only need 15 minutes from one client to the next. But by allowing that 30 minutes as a minimum, I didn't have to rush away from the client if they wanted to ask me a question or two. I'd built that into my day that I could give them that little bit of time. I couldn't give them too much time, but I could give them a little bit of time to ask me things after the lesson had finished without having to dash away to the next client. And again, if I got plenty of time and I got to the next client early, then I'll do a bit of paperwork from the last client and just put down their score sheet and their progress sheet. Yeah, and just fill in those little bits while I'm sat there. Whereas I know guys who do this. They'll pick one client up and then drop the other client off, piggybacking, we used to call it. Um, I've never done that. I don't agree with it. Or a friend of mine, he did 55-minute lessons. The 5 minutes was from getting from one client to another. So 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, so on. Whereas mine would be, my first one might be 9 o'clock, my next one will be 10:30 or 10:45. Sometimes it depends on when the train arrives. You know, um, certainly, yeah, I don't do the 8 o'clock in the mornings anymore.
I don't blame you. Now you're retired, make the most of what you
Yeah,
can
10,
and pick the hours
10
you want to
o'clock's
work.
early enough.
So we'll get on with the next question.
Yeah,
Can you tell me one thing you wish you were better at?
speaking.
Speaking, did you say?
Yeah. Um, I do a lot of that.
Okay.
There you go. But yeah, I wish I was more eloquent at speaking. Yeah.
Interesting answer at the end of a podcast.
Yeah.
Speaking. And then we've got the final one now is for you and whatever you want to talk about that we haven't managed to now. So, any final messages, anything that you want to share, anywhere that you want to send people that hasn't been mentioned, feel
I
free
would,
to fire
I would
away.
say don't let people tell you you can't. Um, when I announced to my family that I was going to become a driving instructor, having left school illiterate, there was a lot of you're going to crash and burn. So don't let anyone tell you you can't do something. If you think you can do it and you've got an interest to do it, do it. Don't let anyone put you off. If you crash and burn, then so be it. That's at least you've tried. The only people who've never failed are the people who've never tried. I think fail is the first attempt in learning, isn't it?
I like that one.
Um, you know, I did judo for a number of years. I'd never been a fighter at school. Um, because of my brother's reputation, I'd avoided fights in school. I enjoyed doing judo, but it was a controlled fight. Um, so yeah, never let anyone tell you you can't do something. Again, when I applied to become a firearms license holder, there was a lot of people who said, "Oh," got to be really, really good to be a firearms certificate holder. You know, you got to be a person who's got no skeletons in the cupboard and all this lot. Um, Same thing when I told one chap I was going to become a driving instructor. Oh, they're very intelligent driving instructors. In other words, he was saying you ain't intelligent enough. So yeah, don't let people tell you no. Don't listen to the naysayers. If you've got a passion for something, do it. Whether it's pistol shooting, whether it's air rifle shooting, whether it's playing darts, whether it's playing pool. Um, if you've got an interest, go with it. You know, over the years, I've had several hobbies that have not continued. Um, yeah, try it. If you don't like it, you don't have to carry on, but don't let other people tell you no.
That's a great message to end on, especially with the line of work that you're doing and the people that you're helping. It's
A
that's
lot,
a great message.
a lot of the clients I work with have been told, no, you can't do that. Um, and when you do get them through a driving test that mum or dad thought they'd never be able to drive a car, yeah, it's a great feeling.
I imagine it is.
You know, that's why I don't want to give it up.
We'll keep you going. We'll have you back in 6 months' time telling
Yeah,
us that you've retired again.
yeah, I probably will be retiring again. I did a talk to the MSA in Gloucester, and I kept referring to the fact that I'd retired and forgetting that I'd retired.
It's
That's
fascinating.
the way it
Well,
goes. But if anyone wants to come along and see us, we'll be at the MSA conference, the DDI, Disability Driving Instructors. So that's just over the way in Telford. So we'll be on, I think it's the 20th something of March, 23rd of March. So we'll be there with our little stand and our little yellow shirts on. So we'd be happy to see anyone who wants to come along and talk to us. We're always happy to talk. But if
amazing.
anyone wants to ask me any questions, I'm always available.
We'll get all of the websites, links, anything you want. We'll get it put in the description so people can find the information that they need and hopefully increase the numbers offering the service that you do. But Hayden, thank you very much for your time tonight. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks, mate.